Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when it's finds you. I want to talk about a subject today, and as I've stated, they were trying to cause division, but I believe the truth has been hidden for so long, and that's why I bring these things out. And unfortunately, you do have people that don't like the truth because they like to buy into the lies that the school system and the system altogether have taught us over the years. Booker T. Washington said, I'm not gonna I don't have a whole quote, but the first part of the quote is all I want to mention. So I didn't write it down, but he said something to the fact that it's often very easy to influence others in the wrong direction. And so that's all. That's all I'm gonna say on that one. But like I said, the quote is much longer than that, but I don't even know what the rest of it says. That was enough for me. But I want to talk about the word nigger. And I mean, for me personally, I don't like using the word. I've never really liked us addressing each other like that. But I'm going to give you a little bit of history of the word because nowadays it's actually used as a term to demoralize blacks around the world. But I've mentioned in videos before that the origin of the word comes from a term called injure. N-G-R. Or no vowels at the time. But I just pronounce it injure. E-N-G-E-R. I just pronounce it injure. It's easier to do that way. But it actually means what we call netger or netyer. And that was actually a term that it was a term that Egyptians used to reference pharaohs who were black. And they referenced them that way because they were considered gods on earth. Now, some of the translations say that the word nature was derived from netger or netyer. And there's also a royal title over in Ethiopian culture, that utilized the word negus or nugashi. Now, speaking of the word negus, one of my sisters and I call each other negus all the time after seeing a young white student get scared when he had to spell this word in a spelling bee. And I mean, the kid was terrified to spell that word. And, not understanding the origin of the word and what it really means, you could understand why the child was terrified to spell the word. Niger, we've seen the word Niger in the Bible. There's the river Niger in Africa, but Niger and Negro became synonymous with the word black in the Latin culture. There was an emperor in the Roman culture called Pescennius Niger. So if you had a Roman emperor named Niger, and based on the etymology of the word Niger, that can only mean one thing: the emperor had to be black. Now, Negrito, and you'll see a lot of that in the Hispanic culture where they reference blacks, and I've even seen some of their black beans labeled with Negrito. Negrito, Negress, and Negro was actually taken from the word Niger. And these words are the Spanish translations for blackness. The Portuguese word for black is also Negro. For the Greeks, they use the word necro, Necro. And that necro actually means death. And you heard about dead people, necromancy. And the Greeks, they said it was likened to the word Negro. And so they felt like Africans were communicating with their dead ancestors, so they concluded that the word Negro meant the person who was dead spiritually, mentally, and physically. And because of this is why the word has taken on a negative connotation worldwide. led mostly by people of European descent. Now, basing the word nigger on all of the European lies, they actually corrupted a word that is actually noble. It was not a word of abomination like people around the world believes right today, especially in America. Now, that doesn't mean we as black folks use it freely, especially in front of other people. When we do that, we solidify the term in their minds that we ought to be degraded as a people. Until more people have an understanding of this, the word in all of its meanings and forms will continue to be used as a term to degrade black people by people that are ignorant on all sides of the racial spectrum, including black people. But just to show you how they corrupted the word, Webster Dictionary used to define a nigger as a lazy person years ago. Now, the transatlantic slave trade is what gave the word credibility as one to be used to degrade black people. And they had to use that word in its context because it was much easier to justify slavery when you don't consider black people as human. Europeans also said it meant anyone who was a Negro was not a worthy person who had a worthy purpose in life. And for us as black people, we accept anything that the European school system teaches us. Believe it or not, America's school system is patterned after the Prussian school system. Where is Prussia? In Germany. Where is Germany? In Europe. Charles Hamilton Poe, this older guy, I don't think Poe's living anymore, said that when whites did fund black schools, it was done with control of the black race in mind. So Europeans use every imaginable way to denigrate us. And then they brought their system of education to America to continue to denigrate us. And sadly, we actually bought into it. Our ancestors were actually the real homeschoolers before it became a largely European way to educate their children. Why do you think when we go back in history, you see that these white families had black nannies and maids teaching their children? Because black women were the true educators of children. They were the true homeschoolers. And now that movement is growing again among black families with the rise of Charlie Victor 19. And so there are a lot of blacks who wanted the European education, and now we as blacks complain about them not teaching us our history. I mean, what do you think the oppressor's going to teach you? Do you think he or she will ever teach you about your greatness and give you the tools to show that you are just as equal to them, just as qualified as them, or better qualified than them? Do you think the people who oppress you will ever teach you anything that would allow you to advance further than they want to allow you to advance? Black people were the first people on earth. Black people built civilizations everywhere they went. The difference of blacks traveling and creating civilizations is they were not looking to colonize these places like Europeans do every time they go somewhere. Blacks were more interested in teaching others how to sustain themselves. They didn't go into other places plundering the lands. We've been told our skin is accursed by people who were actually cursed. We've been told that there will never be any greatness for us on this side of heaven. We were told we were cursed because of Ham's sin, but it was Canaan who was cursed. We were never told that most of the blacks who were scattered throughout the transatlantic slave trade were actually descendants of Sem or Shem, not Ham. Descendants of Ham made up about 5% of the slaves who were actually transported during the slave trade. The other 95% were descendants of Sem or Shem, as we're taught today. We're taught his name is Shem today. That's the English translation. His name is Sem. Yet we have another group of people who claim to be Semites, and that is why you get labeled anti-Semitic if you say something wrong. You heard me say they claim to be. That's because they aren't. The world was told this lie that the black race was cursed from the 3rd to the 6th centuries. Now, look how much time they dedicated to spreading this falsehood. They spent 300 years making sure this lie would stick. And all you have to do after repeating the lie for a long period of time is to keep throwing it out there from time to time to make sure no one forgets. You know, and at that point, the lie becomes truth. The lie about the black race being cursed was really promoted during the slave trade by the people who were doing the selling of people they enslaved. As I stated, this allowed them to actually justify the inhumane treatment of a people. And because they did this, it allowed them to subdue whatever feelings of guilt that they had. Black people were the ones who introduced civilization to everybody around the world. And I mean everybody. If you want a good read, get you a copy of Black Spark, White Fire by Richard Poe. Black people were the first people on Earth. Black people were the first people in China, even introducing martial arts, forming in the military strategy to that part of the world. Blacks built the pyramids in China and Japan, as well as the ones in Mexico. But the only ones we are taught about are those in Egypt, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Thailand, Burma, and Cambodia had all of their kingdoms established by black people. We ain't never been taught that. The Olmecs down in Mexico were a black people and introduced the calendar and alphabet to the central and south and southern part of North America. See, even in school, we were taught Canada and the United States was the only part of North America. Mexico's part of North America. And they also worshiped blacks as gods. Now, the Spaniards were the ones who destroyed anything referring to blacks when they came to the Americas, just as they had done regarding anything regarding the Moors, who were also black. Black Phoenicians were the one who found the city of Cadiz in Spain, and they taught the alphabet to Europeans. The original Druids were actually black priests. Blacks set up the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete. They set up the Harappan civilization in India. Blacks actually created many of our modern day sports such as boxing, weightlifting, and gymnastics. I mean, look how all of that stuff was taken over by others. Because in many cases, we don't have that nature to do people wrong except each other. We're so trusting of other people, but not each other. And a lot of us do whatever we can to make sure we don't trust each other. Now, most of us have heard of Nimrod, and he was a black man. Nimrod built the world's first skyscraper. How did blacks build those pyramids without modern technology? Those pyramids had to be built with actual high levels of mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and things like that. How did they do that if they had made no contributions to anything on Earth? Because we've been told that too. And those pyramids that they built still stand right today wherever you go around the world. Black people created the first surgical instruments. They created the first furniture. They were the actual first farmers. What was Adam's job when God put him there in the garden? You take care of this garden and all these animals. Yes, Adam was a black man. They're not teaching you that either. So, how did black people not offer anything to society but free labor if black people created all this? Blacks created the banjo and the guitar. What many don't know, especially black people, because we keep repeating this stupid stuff all the time, all of the major religions were created in Africa. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, Confucianism, and Taoism. All of them had their originations in Africa. Buddha and Krishna were actually worshipped as black men. Blacks are the ones who ushered in the Renaissance period over there in Europe. Because history actually records that during this time, Europeans were illiterate and believed in superstition. And if you go study these great Greek philosophers, Socrates, and I can't even think of the rest of their names right now, they got ran up out of Europe because they went learned under these black people and to try to bring some of those ideas back, and they got ran up out of there. The Moors, or the Black Moors, as they were once called, they were the engineers and shipbuilders and astronomers of their time when Europe was still basically in the dark. Like I said, get your copy of Black Spark, White Fire by Richard Poe. The last time I saw it, I think it was running for about $67. And hopefully you can find it cheaper than that, but I'm just saying. That's kind of what kept me from getting it for a long time, the price of it, and I just went ahead and bit the bullet and got me a copy. But the Blackamoors actually introduced classical music to Europe. Now, it's amazing that the black skin is frowned upon right today. Not by everyone, but we still know it exists. But even blacks used to believe if they intermarried coming out of slavery with someone that had white skin, their offspring would be intellectually superior. Ironically, black skin was considered superior centuries ago, and many Europeans wanted to intermarry with black people for this very reason. Beethoven and Bernadette, she was the founder of the Swedish monarchy. They were actually descendants of the blackamoors. See, history ain't teach you that Beethoven was black. A lot of your people of Irish descent descended from blackamoors. Irish women intermarried with blackamoors during the Spanish Armada. Now, according to a Scottish guy named David MacRitchie, blacks were the original race of the British Isles and were the builders of the megalith structures in several places. Now, history also records that blacks built the megalith structures up in New England, Massachusetts. We've all heard of Hannibal, and he's actually been considered the greatest military strategist who ever lived, and he was a black guy. Christ and his mother Mary were worshipped across Europe as black people, and they actually believe Mary to be the Black Madonna. People of Germany, France, Poland, Russia, Spain, Italy, Belgium, Switzerland, and Britain. People in Britain actually worship the Black Madonna and her child. These people worshiped and revered them so much that they had paintings and carvings of the Black Madonna and her child in their churches and homes. Now, Napoleon Bonaparte came along and had all of them destroyed and replaced with white Madonna and white child. And your man over in Germany, back during World War II, gave orders to those to have the ones in his country destroyed. And then you had the Catholic Church use Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci to recreate or alter versions of the Black Madonna and her child. And the very first man that kind of took on a mentorship role in my life, named Al, he and I would talk about church and religion all the time. And, he's the one that helped me understand, and he's passed on now. He's been gone for 12 years now, in his 80s when he passed. But he's the one that first told me about St. Augustine. And St. Augustine was a black man, and he's actually considered the father of theology. Now, he was actually influenced by many black saints of his era, including St. Maurice. And no, Maurice is going to listen to this video. I'm not talking about you. St. Maurice is actually considered the greatest patron saint of the Roman Empire. Now, we've never been taught of the black popes other than St. Peter, but there were 3 black popes during the 2nd through the 5th centuries. You had Victor I as well, Mechades, and St. Gelasius. Those were all popes, black popes. Your gods and goddesses of Greek mythology were also black. See, they never taught us that Zeus was black, that his wife Hera was black, that Venus was black, Hermes and Apollo were black, Athena was black, Hercules was black. And it's amazing, just like they did with the Lone Ranger, Moses, Cleopatra, and a few others I can't think of right now. Hercules was also, all of these people were portrayed as white by the Western world. I mean, if you go watch the movie The 10 Commandments, and you got Charlton Heston playing Moses, and Moses came from the tribe of Levi, black tribe. You got Cleopatra being played by Elizabeth Taylor. I forget the name that played the Lone Ranger, the guy that played the Lone Ranger, but the Lone Ranger was a black guy named Bass Reeves, who's considered to be the baddest marshal on the planet at that time. But the Western world painted them all white, showed us white. The author of the poem Iliad is named Homer, and Homer's black. And actually, that poem is still read by modern audiences today. And Euclid is said to have given the Western world geometry, was black. Now, there's a lot more information I could present on Black success, but I want to keep the video manageable. You know, y'all know I can do a video hour and a half, 2 hours long, maybe 3, 4. I could just talk, but when you do that, people lose interest. But I wanted to keep this manageable, but give you enough information on how the world used to revere Black folks before Europeans started to paint Blacks as the dregs of society. Chinese people used to want their children to marry Black people. Arabs used to revere the Black face. Asian Indians used to revere the Black skin. And all of these people at one time had a very unfavorable opinion of Europeans, especially Germans and Galatians. Now, centuries later, these same Europeans got the world to change the opinion of themselves and got them away from seeing Black people as a noble people. Hey, there's nothing wrong with making yourself look good. The problem I have is making yourself look good while doing whatever you can to make others look bad. Now, Galatians 3:28 is a well-known scripture that's quoted by many Christians, especially those who aren't Black. There's no Jew, no Greek, no bond, no free. Now, that sounds great coming out of many Christians' mouth, but there have been many studies that show that the biggest racists in America are white Christians. Many of them only believe that Galatians 3:28 as long as they are the free ones and have always been the free ones and not bound. And they think Black folks need to get over what happened to them in the past. But, and I know when we say the word but, it negates the prior statement. So I'm negating the prior statement. We just had September 11th pass. And what's the mantra then and now? Never forget. Every year on December 7th, we're told to remember Pearl Harbor. Every year, we're told to never forget the victims of the Holocaust. As a matter of fact, some Christian missionary organizations are still advertising for Americans to take care of survivors of the Holocaust and send them money. Now, combined, the years of these 3 incidents do not equate to the number of years that Black were enslaved in this country. Pearl Harbor was a one-day event. Yeah, you can go behind and say World War II that led to World War II and it lasted several years. Well, it still doesn't equate. But it was a one-day event. The Holocaust was a 2-year event or a 6-year event, depending on which version of history you want to believe. So when we total up the parts of history, we're told to always remember and to never forget. For the benefit of this video, and I'm going to be favorable to the victims of the Holocaust, there are only 6 years to mourn. Total. That's combined. All 3 events combined. And when you total up the years of enslavement of Blacks in this country, from the first recorded story they tell us, it's 1619. So, 1619 to 1865. That's 246 years of mistreatment that Blacks are continually told to get over. That's 240 more years than those 3 years combined. Now, you try to have a conversation about the Holocaust with a white Christian and watch how that conversation goes. It's going downhill from there.